Good evening to you and welcome to the second Kyalami Schools Lekgotla. We had our first event like this on the 10th of March, and here we are 3 weeks later, and we're delighted to welcome you to the webinar online. We have 10 people in the room, or that's what we're expecting this evening, and some people are still coming in. Great to have you here. And we had 90 bookings online. So we went from a group of about 15 in the first round to a group of 100 in the second round, which means the reach is getting bigger, and we're really delighted that you could join us. So thank you for being with us. I'm also delighted this evening to be joined by a colleague, and I will allow her to introduce herself. Over to you, Thembi.
Sanbonani, hello everyone. My name is Thembi Mashigo. I'm the head of diversity, transformation, and inclusion. And we will be leading this discussion and hoping that we'll hear the different voices, concerns, opportunities that are coming from the audience. It's not only about us, it's about this community that we are building.
Thank you. So the logo that we had designed for this Lekgotla has got a particular focus, and the first one is coming together. We're coming together in real life here. We're coming together online. We're coming together in mind and hopefully in spirit, and increasingly, I hope, after COVID, in body as well. Sharing together. There has been quite a lot of sharing in the early part of this year, and subsequent to the first Lekgotla, we had 27 really positive and rich engagements between the schools, the head office and parent body working together, because it can't all be about talk. There is work to be done, and then succeeding together, because we believe if we get this right, if we get the engagement right, there's only one way we can go, and that is to go forward successfully and to go up all the time. Just before we move on, I'd like to recap perhaps a couple of things that we mentioned in the first Lekgotla, and that was in broad terms describing the Kyalami Schools strategy. That strategy is currently being cascaded into each of the schools, into each of the divisions within the company, and the heads of those schools and the senior management are currently working on that. I personally worked with heads and senior management of the schools in the last week, and I think there is a rich debate, a rich outcome in process. We did say that everything about the strategy in the company, it's about values and action. These schools were founded 20 years, 25 years ago as community schools. They were intended to be an alternative to what was available at the time. There's a particular ethos here. There's a particular set of values. And I think that still lives in the schools very strongly. So our strategy is really about values, what we want to be, what we aspire to be. It's not about beating competition or being better than anybody else. It's about being the best we can be according to the way we want to be. So in that particular case, I think what we're saying is that the strategy that the executive and the management and the board went through in 2019 and through last year, as difficult as it was last year, was about clarifying where we want to go. It's a difficult thing in these testing times to know exactly where to go. We're also in an environment that is changing all the time, and we think that the strategy has definitely moved us along in that direction. The COVID, it's still a reality today. There are good news, obviously, this week with vaccinations in line, and hopefully in 12 months' time, we will have emerged from this very difficult period. I think also, when we think that sometimes we can't do things well in our country, if one looks around the world, you can see that there are lots of countries that are not doing nearly as well as we are. Our COVID lockdown is nothing like what it is in other parts of the world. We're in a relatively free space here tonight. I know I should be wearing this, but we're considering this to be a restaurant because we've got water in front of us. So we're not going to be wearing these, although most of the people in the room are actually wearing their masks. But our strategy in the company also is about showing confidence in the future. We need to be showing our community, and indeed the broader community, that Kyalami Schools believes that the future is going to be better than the past. We had a really rich board meeting last week, Wednesday, exactly this time last week. And I came away from that incredibly enthused, and I think board members did too, because I think we know that we can begin to implement aspects of the strategy that's going to very visually show the community that we're beginning to get on the move again, even before we all get vaccinated, etc. But, and this wasn't on the last sheet, but I think it's really important. We can do all the strategy work we want to do. We can do it from now until the end of the decade. It's not going to get us anywhere unless we begin to change culture, and that means we have to change people. And change management is going to be a big part of this as we go forward. So from that perspective, we're talking tonight specifically about the people aspect, about the fact that these schools represent the diversity of South Africa in all its elements. It's all here, except it's mostly in the student body. It's not really among the staff, and it's not in the management or at the senior leadership. These are challenges for us. We have to address those, and I believe we have the honesty and we have the strength and the candor to do that correctly.
And I think just in line with what Mr. Hamilton is talking about, it is also important to talk about the orientation or the place of the mind and the spirit and where you need to be in terms of doing the work of TDI, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the self. It is a continuous process of self-reflection, reflexivity, asking yourself when you are engaging with others, what is happening with me? Where are my trigger points? What do I need to change and how can I change it? And that is an ongoing process. At the same time, while we do know, while there's research and backup and different books that have been written on the work, some of the things we do not know. Some communities are different. Some of the challenges are still being recorded. So it's also about accepting that I don't know what I don't know, and being curious about getting new information and engaging with different others so that we come to a place of knowing. It is also about suspending certainty, judgment, and advocacy. These kinds of positions can limit embracing change, can limit openness, can limit curiosity. So, what we are encouraging people to do is learning to live with ambiguity, is learning to live with uncertainty, unfolding, and complexity. It is learning to live with tension, and that my truth is not the only truth. I can still live with Hamilton's truth while also living with my truth. And those are the things that we are even facing in the student body, where they come up with different sort of challenges. Say, but Sis Thembi, this is how I see life. This is how I live. And I must not be faced by that because I know who I am, but also engaging in a way that allows them to show up in their best selves in a respectful way. It is also about courage. As Hamilton had already said, Uti, these schools had been created with certain values. And so when we are changing systems, when we are challenging whiteness, when we are challenging coloniality, it comes with discomfort because we're changing parts of ourselves. And so we have to embrace that discomfort as we're going throughout this journey. It's not only about policies, it's not only about hiring, but what is the mind and the heart and the spirit saying? And that's the key.
I think following on from that, there's no doubt diversity in terms of headcount, in terms of one was to take a photograph of our schools, the various classes. We've got all of South Africa represented here, and we're very proud of that. It is a concern that if we were to do the same thing with our staff, to be frank, we would not have the same diversity. So therefore, there are large proportions of our children in our classes who can't look around the schools and see themselves reflected in positions of authority, access, power, etc. And that is something that is really important to all of us. We like to feel that we are in a community that opens itself to us and that gives us a lever for inclusion. And I think this particular graphic is quite useful. I mean, diversity is one thing, but diversity doesn't necessarily mean that we've got equity. But equity itself doesn't mean that we got inclusivity or inclusion. It's when we are actually allowing everyone the space to have their voice and then to have that voice heard and acted upon that we've got a really inclusive place. So it's not going to be good enough for us to be appointing a head of department for isiZulu or for whatever, or even in the company, as was the trend in South African corporate work for a long time, the executive in charge of HR is X, but the CFO, the CTO, the CIO, or the CEO could never be that. You know what I'm talking about? It can't be like that in our organization. Mm-hmm. We've got to have people in every level who represent the diversity that we've got. So from that point of view, if we don't have the diversity in the executive group or the management group of our schools, we're losing perspectives that are essential to our better future. No question about it. In addition to that, we have very technical work that I think we are addressing. Staffing, policies, management, curriculum, co-curriculum, they're all in need of revisit, etc. And that process is currently underway for sports, where we already had a fantastic strategy session last week, and we're coming together on the day after school breaks up. For teachers, this is a phenomenal thing, let me tell you. We go on holiday on the 14th of April, and we have a group of about 20 of us across all the schools who are getting together on the 15th to hammer out the next stage of our sports strategy. That's how excited we feel about it, etc. It's also in small things. Read a fabulous article in the North American Independent Schools magazine last week, which I shared with my colleague Mark Naidu, and it talked about systems. It's not just about individuals, it's about systems in schools, but they also spoke about fractals. And if those of you who may have studied mathematics, a fractal is a small part of what might seem like quite a chaotic kind of situation. And the wonderful thing, I did maths myself at university, the wonderful thing about chaos is what appears to be chaotic is in actual fact quite beautifully symmetrical. There is incredible order to it. And what you find is the system or the design of the whole is reflected in the smallest interaction within the entity itself. So the way two children speak to each other in a corridor is reflecting of the way we all speak to one another throughout the organization. And a small thing, the board meeting last week, you might say, well, you should have done this a long time ago. Yes, maybe we should, but it's done now. The parent contract, the new parent contract, no longer says father, mother. It says parent 1 and parent 2. Now that in itself is including people who felt excluded 2 weeks ago. There are probably another 1,000 such examples we have to get through in the next couple of years, but we're going to get to them one by one as we go. And I think, as I said earlier on, our schools have changed and have changed for the better. And it's time for us to catch up in terms of everything that we've done. And even though these schools were only set up post-democracy, 1996 for the prep, Beaulieu Prep, 1999 for Kyalami Prep, 2000 for the college, they were set up according to a template that came from apartheid and the colonial mindset. They were not set up for a post-democratic mindset. That doesn't mean that they have not done really well in the last 20 to 25 years. My word, these are successful schools. They are incredibly successful in so many ways. But we have to create a new type of success going forward now, because that old template doesn't actually actively embrace the future that we envisage for our country, etc. So I'm not going to go through everything that's on here. We've already largely spoken about the fact that schools are a microcosm of society. There's no issue that we're encountering here at these schools that you don't encounter in your businesses, in your corporate world, maybe even in your own homes, or maybe even in the community you live in. These are realities of our everyday life. We're going to run into these situations time and time again. What's really important is that we begin to respond to them in a way that shows we got faith in our ability to navigate here. We can't be because there are external factors saying, please do this, Mr. CEO, please do this, heads and executive, because it's going to look good. It's going to be good for you. We have to do it because we actually believe that it's essential for us to show the way more than anything else. It's also going to mean that I think myself, the executive, The senior management in the schools are going to have to understand that there are strategic aspects to this, for sure. Strategy is about doing well. We're not going to do well unless we are diverse, unless we are inclusive and we transform ourselves. There are purely educational roles as well. Without diversity and active diversity, we won't be able to maximize or optimize our educational program. But also there are moral imperatives here. It's the right thing to do. It's as simple as that, and we intend to be doing that. So I think in that perspective, and I'm certainly heartened as I reach, it's the last day of my third month, my first quarter as CEO. I'm incredibly enthused by the fact that I'm receiving so much encouragement from members of staff at all levels, and indeed parents and other stakeholders as well, to understand that it's important for us all to work together to make this happen. It's an imperative for our future success. It's not a nice to have, it's not an added on. So take that strategy from the last time, take what we're talking about tonight. They're enmeshed so much. They go together hand in hand, hand in glove. One doesn't work without the other. The four components of it might be understanding transformation, diversity, and inclusion. And at the college, there's been quite a lot of that over the last few years. And Thembi here has been consulting at the college for how long now?
4 years before this position.
Yeah. And how would you characterize the journey you've been on over the last 4 years?
It's been a hard journey. It's been challenging. I think what we always find, and you also find this, is that the youth are always pushing us to positions of change. And at times, if you find resistance in the system, it can be hard to change. What is useful and helpful is when leadership is on board in terms of the strategy that is going forth, and then you create an environment that is more enabling. I think now the momentum is picking up, and also what happened with the Black Lives Matter movement and how it permeated into our South African environment, into here. And what our students were saying certainly has accelerated the need and the passion, although there'll still be resistance.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that. So understanding, advocacy, messages for the school community, but also engagement with the school community. I've learned so much in the last 3 weeks since the last Lekgotla. And one of the strong messages that have come from so many parents is, we've got so much to offer. We don't want you necessarily just to do things for us or to us or on our behalf. We'd love to be involved. We've got capability. We've got networks. We've got insights. Please include us. Those people who are here in the room tonight, we're going to get every detail about you before you leave, and hopefully many people online as well, because we want that. And advocacy means all of you maybe hopefully leaving here tonight and saying, we're not totally convinced perhaps, but we think there may be the start of a journey here that we would like to support and enable in whatever way we can. Perhaps other things from our point of view, institutional change, and I think from an executive point of view and a purely technical point of view, policies, protocols, ethos, cultures, we can work on that as management. And as I said with the parent contract, just eliminate biases and prejudices and blind spots and isms that may be there. And then, of course, the challenge, the biggest challenge of all is our own personal journeys. And I was privileged actually to be part of a 2-day workshop, Friday and Saturday of this last weekend, 8 o'clock until 4:30 on both days, that was organized by Mark Naidu, our group head of academics and innovation. And all of the heads and all of the senior management and all of the campuses were there. It was tough work. It's hard work. There was a vulnerability in the place. The facilitator was absolutely excellent, provided a safe space for people to be vulnerable. But I know for a fact that all of us left at the end of the first and the second day somewhat exhausted. Many of you will have been through these events yourselves, all right? That was part of a personal journey for many of our senior people in our organization. And it's a journey that only each individual can undertake for himself or herself. There's nobody who can speak it for you or lead it for you necessarily, but we can provide a safe avenue perhaps for the people to move in. That is a big journey, and those personal journeys will be ongoing. They will be ongoing, full stop. There's no end to it, actually, as we go, okay? And the one thing that perhaps we also understand is that activities in all four of these components can happen at the same time. They're interchangeable. We don't have to say it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So what might it look like? Because I thought I'd put this slide in to preempt some of the questions. What might it look like? What is it going to be like? Okay. Well, we have to make reasonable progress in diversifying the composition of our teaching teams and our management teams. Simple as. It's a no-brainer. It has to be like that, so that every sector of our community feels like they belong, that they have voices and identity markers that they relate to very easily, so that they don't feel that the environment they are investing in with their hard-earned money, they're trusting in with their children, is in some way exclusionary to them as individuals, to their language, to their race, to their ethnicity, to their culture. Training and developing, that's underway. That's already started. I am absolutely certain that we are going to be strongly ambitious in this area, so that we can help our staff to be more receptive, more aware, and to be more respectful of the differences that we've got here. One of the things that the management teams on the weekend were dealing with is like, there's no such thing as I'm not a racist. We're either less or more. That's it. I'm not a sexist. If you're a male, you're either less sexist or more. I'm not a homophobe. You're either less or more. I'm not an ableist. You're either less or more. You're somewhere on a continuum. All we can try for is to be in the less side, right, Thembi?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what I've found useful over the years when doing this work, Tom, in organizations and within myself, is thinking about how the isms are activated within myself. How is racism activated within you might be different to how it is activated within me as a Black woman. And so how do we engage constructively when that happens, so that it doesn't become a defensive process, but really just thinking that we've all been marinated in the system. We cannot deny that. And so how can we work through this over time?
Yeah, perfect. And then the last point there is just, create an institutional culture that has got fair process, that's an inclusive kind of culture as well. And there's quite a lot of technical nature in that, but there's a lot of dialogue there as well, as we move along. We left this quote in, both Thembi and I like this. This is not BEE. This is not employment equity. This is not tick boxing or compliance. This is diversity, transformation, and inclusion, because we need to have all colors, all genders, all backgrounds, all preferences in the house if we are going to make decisions that are not going to have blind spots that are fatal at some stage. That's the case we are in. And perhaps this slide, and this is the last of my slides, and then Thembi is going to take it through for the next maybe 5-10 minutes, is from an executive point of view. I'm dealing at board level. We have a board member here tonight. There will be greater diversity on the board. I can say that's one of our objectives this year. We within the staff, I think we've made reference to that quite a lot. From students and pupils, it's also about giving them some agency to understand that they have the potential and the ability to demonstrate an ethos of transformation, of inclusivity themselves. They don't have to necessarily think that it's got to be done with them or for them or enabled for them by adults in the house. And I think we're going to be speaking quite a lot about that over the course of time. Simple processes like procurement in the corporate world, you know what we're talking about, but we need to be mindful of that. There are ways of doing it that mean that we are particular about who we choose to have as our service partners. And then social development, and in my last letter to parents, I made mention of this. I think, one of our goals is to produce global leaders. Well, my own view on that is, if you're going to be a global leader, you start by being a leader at home, right here. What can I do to change my immediate context? Because if I can do that, I can change the world. And I think we're looking at some sort of social development, social activism, social engagement, which will include all of us, parents, students, members of staff, but it's not a program that's necessarily designed as an institutional kind of thing, but rather it's a whole ecosystem of us saying, we live in an area that is well-to-do. We can travel a few kilometers and we will be dealing with people who are really in desperate straits most of the time. We can't deny that we must have an obligation and a moral imperative to deal with that. So that's just the overall picture from our side.
Mark, may I get a sense of time? Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so in terms of the ABCs of inclusion, Dr. Lee Beverly Tatum captures it nicely. Affirming identity. It really is thinking about, okay, so when people are invited, who is in the picture? Whose voice is present? How is it present? And is it fully optimized? And people can feel when it is a token appointment or, a stunt. For example, there was an interaction that I had, and I was having a conversation, started the conversation, there was good eye contact, and then there was a third person involved who was different from me, less eye contact, and then there was no eye contact. And then I started thinking in myself, okay, what is happening within here? I'm feeling excluded. And these are some of the ways in which what we call microaggressions can even start manifesting in the system, that when someone is included, but not fully authentically, you can even sense energetically and in the eye contact and body that it's not really inclusion. When we're also talking about building a community, we are creating a school and a culture that is able to thrive because everyone feels included. We're talking about building enabling communities where kids and now students can come up and say, Sis Thembi, there's a particular intervention. Last week, there was a student who said, Sis Thembi, there's an intervention that I want to do. What do you think? And I said, go ahead. As long as it is embracing our values of DTI, let's go. Cultivating leadership. We are all leaders. We are all part of the change. And how can we actively go on with the process of leadership and pass the banner on in an empowering way? So also, what is the legacy that we are creating within the school and for the students that are coming? So in terms of our vision, mission, and values, I'm sure some of you who go through the newsletter might have seen these. Nonetheless, if you haven't, our vision is to create an inclusive schooling environment for all to show up as our best selves and to participate optimally. I mean, can you imagine that if I was stressing right now that my Zulu tongue might show up, I might be very careful about the kinds of things that I say. But because I'm okay with speaking Zulu, I'm okay, and I know that I don't have to have a particularly Western accent to know that I'm fully heard within myself and externally. I don't have to worry about that. I think Toni Morrison captures it quite beautifully when she says that the function and the very serious function of racism, prejudice, and discrimination is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work because it is extra baggage that you have to deal with. That is unfair. And we do not want that within our schooling system. We want our teachers and we want our students to show up as their best selves. So our mission statement is not only connecting across divides, but it is also embracing the differences. And remember, I said that it's also about holding the multiple truths. Just because I'm embracing who you are doesn't mean that I'm losing a sense of myself. Ethical engagement and critical engagement, where we are facilitating an environment, and I think this is also the environment like that, where there's questioning. thinking, connecting, and challenging from a place of goodness where we are building each other with no intent to harm. Although sometimes when we do have these kinds of conversations or changes happening, harm can happen, but also how can we repair from that? And then we've got Ubuntu, life enhancing connection, where people are seen, are validated, are heard. Uyabonwa. You're not just here to fill a seat, but what is it that you bring? And who are you? We are interested. Please let us know what is happening.
Mm.
Grace and restoration. This is about being open to giving people the benefits of the doubt. I think some of us are quite active on social media, and we can see the destruction of call out culture, where people's lives are destroyed because it is much more easier to find, a monster in someone else than kind of thinking about, is there a place for restoration? Is there a place for giving that person the benefits of the doubt?
Mm.
Hey, man, what happened when you said this and this and that? It is also about acknowledging pain when there has been harm, because pain not fully healed has a way of repeating itself, repeating also within a system. And so engaging in healing processes, and some of the workshops and the work that we'll be doing are about that, engaging in healing processes. Now, we cannot do grace and restoration without the accountability and justice. This is in psychology, we often call this the paternal functioning, that you need the structure in order for the grace and the restoration to happen. And these are embedded within the South African Constitution. So being aware of all our rights and how can we navigate this journey, embracing grace and restoration, accountability and justice. Engaged in time. The distinction between the past, present, and future is a stubbornly persistent illusion. And it also just comes back to the sense of, if I have not healed something, it will come back. When issues are not properly resolved, there will be a repetition. How can we close that loop so that we are moving forward? We often hear, but why are we often going back? You have to go back when things are not fully healed and not fully resolved.
Mm.
Our past is traumatic, and most of us carry this trauma. How do we heal it so that it's not repeated into the future? Communication and transparency. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton, for leading this process of engaging more with the parent body, because you are also active citizens that can either contribute to the building of a more inclusive society or take us back. It's as if we were aligned. I was thinking to myself, gosh, wouldn't it be great to actually go back to the very beginning?
Mhm.
Um, when the school was mostly the heads were all white, and get those students involved in their voices. But even the students that were here last year, um, that spoke up in terms of the Black Lives Matter and the experiences within the school, that they come back and contribute and help us to build a more inclusive future. But I think even these sessions that we are having with the parents today, this is the start. And I think focus groups will be crucial in hearing the parental voices.
Yeah, and I empathize. I mean, I would
Mm.
imagine for the thousands of Black South Africans who went into schools that were previously white schools in the 80s and 90s, they went into schools that perhaps thought they were doing the right thing, and they were quite proud of what they were doing. And many of these schools in their histories will talk about having opened up, as in, we've let you in. But it was very clearly understood that we've let you in on the basis that you don't change what we've got, that you assimilate and you do it as we do it. And ideally, we'd like you to leave your real lives behind as you come through the gate. I mean, I might be overdoing it, but I understand where you're coming from. And I think many of those institutions have had to go through their own internal reckoning and reconciliation with what perhaps they did that was damaging to the people who came to them in the early days. And I think that would be true of the vast majority of South African schools, both independent and ex-Model C schools in that way. Interestingly, though, even though, as I said earlier on, these schools weren't around in the 70s, 80s, or whatever, in many ways, the cultural norms and the exclusionary and inclusionary processes and policies were perpetuated, because that's what it seemed to make a good school in South Africa. And I think we're dealing with relatively young schools that are possibly in danger of perpetuating the worst of some of the old days if we don't begin to recalibrate at this stage. And as Thembi said, this is part of that process. It's essential for every single parent from every different background to be able to walk into the school their children attends, if it's part of our group, and feel like I fully belong in this place. I don't feel like I've got to be anything other than myself to be here. I can speak as I like, I can walk as I like, I can be part of this. And really, that's one of the goals we'll be aiming towards. But it's a very keen question you've made. Thanks. So the question from the chat is, have our schools taken into account diversity and broad cultural representation in the libraries and media centers in our schools? I'm fully aware that that is an issue that we are aware of. I don't think that we have gone far enough on that journey as of yet.
In the college?
In the college.
Yes, it's actively being changed and worked on.
Yes. And it is being worked on at the prep schools as well, but we have a good way to go. It's perhaps proper and right that so much of this journey we're on is going to be led by the head and the personnel and the community in the college. They're showing the way, partly because they have greater agency because of their age. It's expected that adolescents will have a much more engaged kind of environment. And if Beaulieu College can show the way in that respect, then Beaulieu Prep School and Kyalami Prep School will be better able to follow. I mean, it's as simple as. But on things like that question that we've just had now, I mean, there's no reason at all. If we are serious about dealing with coloniality and that kind of thinking, when a child goes into his or her library, there should be books in there that speak to their heart, to speak to their home, that speak to their family background and everything else like that. We're on that journey, but it's a long way from finished yet. Yeah, I mean, language policy is one of the most contested aspects of democratic South Africa. And I was in a peripheral level, was involved myself in terms of looking at some policy developments in the 1990s. And there was a time when the feeling was that we should aim to have perhaps a medium of instruction in a school, followed by competency and literacy in a range of national languages. As opposed to the old apartheid one, which was there was a first language, second language. It was a very clear hierarchy. And there was a strong push to say, let's break that hierarchy and get more people multilingual. That didn't actually reach a satisfactory outcome. And largely speaking, the old system was perpetuated. And because of a number of things, because that the resource material for Afrikaans is vast, you know, it was really developed over the previous 60, 70 years, because so many teachers had been trained to teach Afrikaans, and because it was perceived to be somewhat easier to learn for the sort of the English speaking child. And that actually ended up being a case where most schools perpetuated Afrikaans as their singular second language, to be frank, okay? Because you didn't need to do more than one first language and a second language. And I think that's one of the disappointments of it. Then what happened was other schools, more progressive schools said, well, listen, we need to have other languages involved here. So in a school in this kind of area, you could be looking at English, Afrikaans, or isiZulu as your options, because isiZulu is broadly spoken. It's the biggest ethnic and language group in the country. So if you offer that language in your school, you're probably going to be satisfying the need for quite a few. I ran a school in Pretoria for several years, and then that was also a school where we moved across into a progressive kind of view, and that was a school where 7 or 8 years ago we had English, Afrikaans, isiZulu, Sepedi, and Setswana, depending on where the kids came from. And the value of that was children were able to operate in a language that worked well for them. It still meant, to be honest, that the majority of white children chose Afrikaans because of the factor of the difficulty of the language. But offering those broad languages was an important signal for us. And I would imagine here, and I can't preempt these things, that our language policy will be more inclusive. There will be more choice as we go, and there'll be a bigger focus on multilingualism as we go.
I think it's important to look at the compulsory element of it, and I think that needs further investigation.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take that question. I don't want to put too much onto Thembi's shoulders here, because she's not necessarily an administrator in the school. Okay. And I'm speaking now as a CEO who's been in the position for 3 months, but I've read documentation, I've seen the policies, etc. I will be candid here and say that I think our HR practices, the manner in which we advertise, recruit, and appoint people and promote people within our schools needs to be made far more transparent. I think there's a sense of it's networks within networks, etc. There's a perpetuation of sameness in the organization. And so part and parcel of being able to answer that question is that the policies around HR are very, very open and transparent, etc. Secondly, we want to become a school that moves in such a way that the staff reflect the diversity in the school to a far greater extent. I can't really speak from a historical point of view, but what that means for me as a CEO going forward is that if Mrs. Meikle, who's in the room tonight, the principal of the college, came to me and said, I'm just appointing a new maths teacher. I've got 3 candidates here. One of them is a black candidate. The other one is an Indian candidate. And the other one is a white candidate. They're all very similarly qualified with experience. My response would be, you need to choose the black candidate or the Indian candidate. And it's not a racist thing. It's because that is part and parcel of our goal to have diversity in the school. I also know that the school here, this college, has made progress on that. When I consider the diversity among the staff at the college compared to our prep schools, it's significantly different here. It's not anywhere near where it needs to be, but I do know that the head and the senior management here have been conscious of that and have been proactive. I do believe it's an issue that is beginning to get more consideration and response at our prep schools. And for example, at Beaulieu Prep School, we've made 2 new staff appointments this term for the new term, and both of them are Black South Africans. And please, not because they had to be Black South Africans, it's because they hit all the boxes in terms of qualifications, experience, and potential to be great teachers, as well as they were Black South Africans, if you know what I'm saying. All right. And that's important. One of them is going to be at grade 00, and I think one of them is going to be at grade 2. No, it's going to be the science. The head, it's grade 5s, and it's going to be the science teacher at the top end of the school. So that addresses the issue of appointing staff, particularly in the key disciplines, mathematics, science, where you need that strong rigor. Definitely a long way to go, but we're making progress.
The resources are there. The books and the materials are there. Sometimes one has to look beyond the main bookstores. Some of it has to be sourced from the niche bookstores online, but the content is there, because the same concern or similar concern that you have as a Black parent with a child in primary school, I also have the same concern. I have a 6-year-old. And we have gone out of our way to source books that speak about Blacknesses, spiritualities, sexualities, because she's asking those questions. So the material is there. Timelines.
I would say, Thembi, I mean, my previous role, I was CEO at the Royal Bafokeng Institute in Northwest. And Setswana, as you will know, is the least spoken language in the country. And interestingly enough, Botswana is not a pro-Setswana country. It's more of an English resource country. So we couldn't even go across the border into Gaborone to get Setswana materials. So we found ourselves having to develop materials for foundation phase and for ECD. And we ended up in a network of organizations that were producing materials in mother tongue. And I can honestly say the momentum that has been built up in the last 3 years is phenomenal. So your question may have had validity perhaps 5, 10 years ago. Is it there? Thembi has answered. It's there. And you know what? It's getting there in bigger volume. And it's getting there at every single level. It would be possible to have learners or readers in every mother tongue in the country at every level in our schools group if we chose to have it. And actually a lot of that resource, by the way, is available freely. It's not as if there has to be a commercial transaction because of the drive for multilingualism and actually allowing children to have access to their mother tongue in the written word earlier on, because that is so important from a cognition point of view as well in language development. There's no excuses here. It's not as if we would if we could find the material. No, that doesn't work. I think I've already referred in some way to my own experience on that. And that is that one would, listen, we're running independent schools here at the same time. We have to be pragmatic. We can't offer something for which the uptake may be next to nobody, actually, okay? So I would think part and parcel of the rationale going forward on that would be to actually do data on what languages are spoken here. What uptake could we have if we offered X, Y, and Z? And then to move towards getting past the isiZulu, offer one other African language as a starting point and see how that goes, and to see how that changes the demographics in the classes and that sort of thing as well. And then go from that thereafter, actually. So I could say with certainty that there will be additional languages, but it'll have to be done with a degree of commercial sense, to be frank. It cannot be, let's just do it for the sake of doing it. Again, I will start, and Thembi, if you'd like to follow on that. This is part of a coloniality mindset, as in white is linked to quality. White is better. The white teacher is going to be better than the black teacher. The white principal is going to be better than the black principal, etc. And the interesting thing is, whether you're in the house here tonight or online, is that it's not just white people who say that, because you kind of internalized oppression where you believe it yourself, even if you're a black South African or an Indian South African. And to overcome those perceptions is a challenge. And the only way one can do it is to actually make sure that you're making the transition for the right reasons and appointing the right people. If anybody thinks that our schools becoming more diverse in their staffing complement would mean a lowering of standards, the only way we can defeat that conception or that belief is to actually take the journey, move forward on it, and then actually say, well, so how do you feel now? How do you feel? How is this person doing, etc. And handle each one as it comes. There are interesting dynamics already that I've encountered in my 3 months here, and that is, it can be difficult for a black parent to complain about a black teacher in a class because they feel they're doing one of their own a disservice. It can be difficult for a white teacher to do it because they fear they might be considered a racist. We have to talk about standards, engagement, dialogue all the time, and take away some of those other trappings that go with putting people in a pigeonhole to say, I'm paying my fees here. It doesn't matter who I am, where I'm from. I'm paying my fees here. I'd like to know that my child is getting the best possible education, irrespective of whether that teacher is white, black, Indian, colored, whatever, doesn't matter. I would like to know that that teacher is up to the task. But you know what? That's what I'm here for, and that's what the heads are here for. We shouldn't be appointing people to our schools who are not going to deliver the business. Those 2 teachers who've been appointed at Beaulieu Prep School for next term, it's a big statement there. I'm absolutely certain, based on what I've seen, that that grade double note teacher is going to be outstanding. And that science teacher comes with an amazing degree, great experience. 6 months down the line, will we have the same question coming up? I think if that person that asked that question is a Beaulieu parent, they might say, thank you, you've answered the question. We're moving on, thank you very much, let's go with it, etc. But it's important for us, however, to leave the door open for the dialogue to continue. Because there's no doubt in South Africa, there is that internalized oppression still that equates white with better. And it goes across all of our population. It's something we need to actively confront and challenge all the time. And I think we will, but we are going to have to do it all together. It can't be the school doing it. As parents, this body of people, 10 in the room and 100 online, we need to be doing that together as well. Thembi, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, you've captured it quite beautifully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
There's so much going on. So I can speak specifically for the college. We've set up an inclusion committee where it's not only race issues, but it's issues of sexuality, it's issues of curriculum across the board. And we asked our student body what it is that they want to talk about, what it is that they want to engage on, and the different things that they want to change. We have a website that is also operating on inclusion. And the work is continuing. I'm also visiting, I'm doing grassroots visits, going to classes and hearing what the students are speaking about and saying, because there are particular classes and spaces that are hotspots where the teacher has created an enabling environment and the students are speaking their truth. And so that is also very encouraging. On top of that, we have a QR code or discrimination code where anonymously, or they can say their names, students can speak, report on issues or even opportunities that are coming up. My office, these days, it's busy. If it's not staff, it's also the students that are coming in with different ideas and really just sharing what is in their hearts and their minds. And I think it's also just really important that while we hold race issues, we have to think about intersectionality, that it's not only about race. There is a whole lot more that our kids, I'm going to say our kids, are struggling with and are grappling with. And sometimes even home feels like an unsafe space. They come up as their honest and authentic selves within the schooling environment. There are always opportunities for growth, but what I'm feeling and sensing now, I was speaking to Hamilton earlier on, that there is a very energized student body. Though we do have to be aware, or some of our white students are pulling back a bit. And so that is also something that we need to think about and work on, because we do not want to leave anyone behind.
Yeah. I'm just going to encapsulate that question as, how do we provide avenues for parents to become more familiar with how things are done, the culture of the school, the ethos of the school, the significance of certain markers in the school progression for children, etc., rewards, recognition, etc., and to be part of that and to feel that you can enable and support your child in doing that and take pride and be part of it. Let me just say that Beaulieu Prep School and Kyalami Prep School are two of the finest prep schools in Gauteng, bar none. And we want that to be the case going forward. Beaulieu College is really on the march. It's 20 years old, and I would say in the last 10 years, it's really begun to stretch, and particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, it's begun to grow. I think we've got a jewel of education in this school. So therefore, there is a lot of what is done here that we want to safeguard and treasure and take with us on that journey into the future. And you mentioned, for example, the colors blazer or that sort of thing. I'd like to think that that might still have a place, if you know what I'm saying. We're not trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The good that is here, the stuff that really inspires people to strive to be their best is important. But I've picked it up as well. And I think in our one-on-one conversation some weeks ago, I think there has been a reluctance to engage parents on an adult to adult basis. It was more about drop your children at the gate. If you want, you can walk them to class if they're littlies, but really we don't want you around too much. We know what we're doing. My own experience of top level schooling is if the parents aren't part of the community, if the parents aren't fully engaged and around on a regular basis, you're going to miss an important amount of intelligence. Because quite often the parent who would never make an appointment or send an email or even make a phone call to query something may find that courage on the side of by the swimming pool or after the concert or whatever, or at his parents' cocktail meeting to say, you know what, Mr. Hamilton, I've been wondering about this. Have you got an answer for me? And then it's easy. Then the relationship is empowered. I'd like to think that we can promise that post-COVID times, our parents are going to be more plugged into our community than they have been previously. In the meantime, I'd like to promise that we will help our parents to understand us better. This kind of engagement isn't necessarily intended to be the CEO and one other person. It can be anybody in the community. It can be parents in these seats going forward. It could be 3 or 4 parents going forward. It could be alumni, etc. And then we can speak about things like culture and ethos and tradition, even if we are relatively young. So I think this is not a bad way of doing it in this current context. And as we move into the post-COVID context, I think we'll find that we'll have much more of these focus groups and gatherings where it will be face-to-face. And then those parents can empower others to say, well, this is how it's done. Because you don't have to necessarily interface with each one separately. It can be brokers who can bring the word to other people. I hope that answers the question. And one more online. Our view on this is that this is a group issue, a group initiative. It's a group prerogative, imperative actually. But it's our belief that for now, it's best started here because there's more progress here. So that we want to actually develop momentum. And that's why when Thembi came on board, we had the discussion, Mrs. Meikle and I, should this be a head group, a group head of transformation, diversity, and inclusion, or should it be a college appointment? Our feeling was it should be a college appointment initially, because this is where we can do our best work right now. There are a lot of other things we need to begin to do at our prep schools to make that the case. But part and parcel of Thembi's appointment is that she will help us to navigate our way at the prep schools as well. Doesn't mean she's necessarily going to be on the campuses in the prep schools, but she's going to be available to work with staff. We are going to be beginning to push that journey through. I think we're probably going to need to have transformation, diversity, and inclusion agents of change in all of our campuses within a matter of months. I think this is going to pick up a head of steam. It's really, really important. And I spent all of yesterday, from early in the morning right through until late in the evening at our prep schools, engaging with management and staff. And I can honestly say, I feel incredibly enthused and encouraged that the openness for that is there. That's not to say there isn't a degree of trepidation and maybe anxiety, but I think everybody knows that this is a journey we've embarked on and we're going to go forward together on it. I'd like to think as well that both Kyalami and Beaulieu Preps will be able to engage with their parent body and find some of those facilitators within that group. It's quite possible, actually, that this is a community of schools that has missed out on an incredible resource. There are people in our parent body who've got this thing so clear in their heads, who could be amazing change agents for us. There may be people who'd be willing to come and work part-time with us. We want to explore that. In terms of, you mentioned timelines, sir, earlier on and everything else like that. I'd like to think that at every one of these Lekgotlas, and they're going to be about 3 weeks apart, there will be something, even if it's just one thing, we'll be able to say, in the last 3 weeks, this is what's happened. if you know what I'm saying. So we'll be able to tabulate that and begin to report on that as we go. And not just on the transformation and diversity thing, but on the broad strategy as well as we go. Okay. Folks, my battery has just died, and that means I can't show you the last slide. It was meant to be. And I thought that was at 100% earlier on. What it says is,
Pelile. Siyabonga.
Thank you for being here. It's really good to have so many people in the house. It's been wonderful to have so many people online. Our next event is going to be on Wednesday, the 12th of May, which is a couple of weeks after we get back. That particular evening is going to be devoted to this group sports strategy. It's not going to be fully formed, but we will have made significant progress on that by then. And I know that it's something that is on the minds and hearts of a lot of people in the community. And by the way, I think what we're also going to find in that is that that strategy will reflect issues of diversity as well. It's going to be in there as the sort of sports that we play and what we put focus on as well. So thank you for being with us this evening. I'm sorry if we've gone over maybe by 5-10 minutes, longer than we anticipated, but the engagement was good. We live and learn as we go as well. To my colleague, thank you so much.
Siyabonga, Mr.
Okay,
Hamilton.
Kelaboka. To all of you here, good night. Thanks very much.